Hey everybody, I think we're just going to get going here pretty quick. Looks like people are just jumping on. Hopefully I've worked through some of the IT challenges that we had last week. So I've got everybody muted because what was happening last week was when somebody started talking, Zoom would go to that video. So it was getting a little bit confusing. And the other thing, when I was turning away from the mic, it was dropping the audio. So you'll see this fancy headset I got on kind of gives me that airline pilot look. So don't be fooled though, I'm actually a back guy, not a pilot. So if you have trouble like unexpected loss of cabin pressure or stuff, help yourself. Don't look to me to help you. So great. Welcome again. I hope everybody got some value from last week. It was a ton of fun for me actually because some of the feedback I got after the class was awesome. There was some funny stuff. A lady actually sent up a picture. She's from south of the border, south of the 49th. We'll just call her Kate. She set the bar because instead of using a dowel on her stick, she sent a picture of her using a hockey stick, which I thought was pretty awesome. There's a bit of a backstory there without sharing too much. She is a Scandinavian from Minnesota, which I'm sure most of you know has quite a hockey history. Apparently she shared there was some guy from her neck of the woods back in the day who used to be a hockey player, worked his way into coaching, kind of worked his way up the ranks, started coaching their national program, and then put together a team that went to some major international event. I think it was the Olympics or something like that, and they did something really special. So sorry, I'm a little sketchy on the details. It sounded like a big deal, but it never really made the news up here. So anyway, the point was she used a hockey stick instead of a dowel, which was great. So I think I'd love to hear back from some of you if you've got kind of fun stuff that you've used as props or whatever. I'd love to hear how you're doing. The other thing that was really rewarding for me from last week actually was another lady, I'll call her Becky, reached out to me after the session. Poor Becky was having trouble with her sciatica, and her pain wasn't letting her get into some of the exercise positions. So she was concerned and had a lot of questions about whether she should be doing the exercises. Were they going to harm her? Was there other stuff? So all we did was we just jumped on a call together, and it was great because I was able to work with her, and within a few minutes we determined that those exercises were going to be down the road for her. She needed to be have the program individualized, so I gave her some different homework, and we were able to actually get the pain out of her leg within that session. And following up with her, we're going to start to progress her exercises. So I guess the message there, and maybe I didn't make this that clear last week, is just like Becky, if you're having trouble or you need some clarification or you just don't want to try and figure this out on your own, just reach out, either email or call us, and one of us can connect with you to help you move forward. So basically, after talking to some of you, we've created a little bit of a 14-day back pain challenge. Last week, we introduced you to learning how to move at the hips to kind of offload your back. This week, I'm going to share some secrets about stretching that'll hopefully give your hips some ranges of motion that they haven't seen since like the 80s maybe. But combined, these two approaches are going to significantly reduce your back pain, and it should happen within about 2 weeks. So you'll know if you're on track, if your back pain is significantly reduced. So 2 weeks starting last week would put you at about May 1st. So beginning of May, if you're not seeing significant improvement in your back pain, then you might be like Becky, that you just need a little bit of individual tweaking to your program. And so feel free to reach out and just be like Becky. Give us a call, and we'll jump on a call with you and try and help you sort it out. So this week, the big thing is to understand the difference between flexibility and mobility. Remember last week we talked about the joint by joint model and how the body alternates between areas that are supposed to be stable and areas that are supposed to be mobile. And your hips are supposed to be mobile and your back is supposed to be stable. So if you mess with that formula, you run into trouble. So basically, in this case, we're talking about if your hips are too stiff, it transfers in compensation, it transfers more load into your low back. And over time, that repetitive strain of that increased load builds up until finally your back gets injured and you have back pain. So flexibility, it means that the tissues are actually capable of lengthening enough to allow the joint to go into a full range of motion. But mobility means that the body can control that full range of motion. So it requires both our brain and our nervous system to control things. So it's not good enough. Oftentimes what we hear from people is that they try and do their stretches and they feel pretty good for a little while, but then things just tighten back up again. And so they're frustrated, they're doing stretching and they're just not getting anywhere. And so there's a couple of reasons usually that that happens. One is that your daily activities promote stiffness, basically. So a good example, we're probably already, since this COVID thing, we're probably already spending too much time sitting, either Netflixing or we're working from home and we're on desks and computers. So sitting naturally stiffens you back up again. So it's one of those, sorry, people, let me know too if you're having trouble hearing me or if there's another glitch in the IT, just type it in the chat and we'll try and fix things on the fly here. So basically, that's Einstein's definition of insanity, right? If you keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So that's one of the issues, but is that you go back to the same activities that created the problem in the first place, and stretching just doesn't seem to get you out of that. But the other big one that most people don't fully appreciate or haven't fully understood is the mobility side of the equation requires movement control. So our brains and our nervous system have to control that new range of motion. So think about it. If you stretch, you give your whatever body part you're stretching, you give that new range of motion. But if the body isn't used to that new range of motion, that's actually a bit of a dangerous situation, because now you've got a range of motion in a body part that isn't well controlled by your nervous system. Your movement system can't control it. And so if you set a body part into a range of motion that isn't well controlled, then that body part is vulnerable to injury. If stress or strain happens in that new range of motion and the muscles aren't there to guard it, you can get injured. And so the brain will sense that danger signal. And what it does is you've given it this range of motion and it can't control. So it starts sending the signal back downstairs to tighten things back up to a range of motion that it can control. And this brings in a different type of stretching. So I'm going to introduce normal stretching today. I'm going to go over 4 great stretches you can do to really get those hips more like Elvis has. But then I'm also going to introduce a little bit of a different approach that you can try. And what it's designed to do is it's designed to reprogram or retrain the nervous system's ability to start controlling that new range of motion. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. The one I'm going to introduce today is what's called pails and rails stretching. Okay, so let me just see. I think that's it for theory. Hopefully that all makes sense. So basically, 2 things this week. I'm going to teach you basic stretching. So that's going to be, we're going to get into some stretch positions. And the idea is you want to do each hip or each side 2 to 3 times, and you always hold stretches 20 to 30 seconds, okay? But then I'm going to introduce this pails and rails concept. Now, this is a little bit more of an aggressive type of stretch, so we're going to try and start off gently. But if you don't feel comfortable doing it yet, then don't worry about it. Just do the normal stretching. Or if you have any questions or concerns, like I said, just reach out to me, okay? So the first step the first stretch I'm going to introduce is what's called for our hip flexors. So I'm just going to step back to the mat here. Yeah. maybe come on over a little closer, Jeff. There you go. That's good. Okay, that's so basically hip flexor stretching. So hip flexors are these muscles up front. Maybe tip it up a bit, Jeff. My head's cut off. There you go. My son Jeff is on the camera today. So basically, hip flexors are these muscles up front. Now, everybody might have heard that hip flexors tend to get too tight, especially if we're sitting too much. So what a hip flexor is it's a muscle that flexes the hip. It brings your knee towards your chest. And if it's too tight, it can pull you forward or it can really cause strain on your back. So a great way to stretch, I'll show you two different ways, is basically you take the joint and you put it into a flex position. So this is what's called a lunge stretch. So I want everybody to try and stand up and get into this position. And then I'm going to show you the key mistake that most people make when they're stretching their hip flexors is as you start to go into a stretch position, as you start to lunge forward, most people let their back arch too much and they dump into their low back here. And that doesn't allow any stretching and it will just overload your back. So before you get there, what I want you to do, you get into the lunge position and then you're going to perform a pelvic tilt. And all that means is you're going to take your pelvis and you're going to tilt it. You're going to tuck your tail. And as soon as you do that, you'll probably already feel some tension coming into the front of your hip. And that's what you want. As soon as you start to feel some tension come into your hip, then you can start to gently move forward, okay? And the key with stretching is, as you move, you just want to go to where you feel the first barrier of resistance and you just kind of hang out there. And if you're doing it properly, you should start to feel that barrier of resistance there. I can feel it now. It's starting to release and it'll let you pick it up a little bit more. The mistake I see people make is they go right into the end stretch and it's too much. And again, that danger signal goes upstairs and the brain says, whoa, whoa, we can't do that. And it starts sending the signal to tighten things back up. So you start fighting your nervous system on the stretch. So again, you go to where you feel the first barrier and then you just hang out there and you should feel it start to release within about 10 seconds. If you're not feeling that release in about 10 seconds, then you're overstretching. And you'll be amazed at how little range of motion it takes before you go from just right into too much. So I've got a release. Okay, so you're going to hang out there. Just the normal stretch is, again, you hold it for 20 to 30 seconds, and then you would come back up and you would reverse legs. Okay, so you'd go into the other, you do your pelvic tilt and you come forward. See, in me, this side's tighter than this side, so I got to reset that. Okay, so I can already feel that barrier starting to melt, and I can probably pick it up a little bit more. Okay, so you can reach that end range. And again, you want to be able to do each side at least twice. If you're super keen, you can add a third one. Okay, now that's normal stretching. And some of you are probably already familiar with it. You might not have heard about that, hit the first barrier and then hang out and then catch the next barrier. So that might be a difference to the type of stretching you're doing. The pails and rails side of the equation is to start to reprogram your nervous system on how to control that new range of motion, okay? So pails just stands for progressive, active, isometric loading stretch. It's a mouthful, I know. But basically all it is you're going to gently contract the muscles as they stretch. So let's get back into that lunge position again. I'll have you maybe try this if you're comfortable. Again, you do the pelvic tilt and you come up to where that first barrier is and you hang out there. And then, yeah, there it goes. And I'm just gonna see I'm already getting an increased range of motion over where I was. Then what you do, the pail side of the equation means progressive, meaning you're trying to contract the muscles that are getting stretched. They're on the side of the joint that are getting stretched. So in this case, it's gonna be these front muscles. So you want a gentle contraction, like maybe 5 or 10%. And what you're going to do by contracting, you're going to think about maybe bringing your leg forward, but it's an isometric stretch. I don't want any movement. So all you're going to do is think about swinging your leg forward and you hold that pressure with your muscles for about 10 seconds. Okay. Then after 10 seconds, you just relax And now you're going to do the other side of the joint, which is called the rails, regress them. So that's going to be your butt and your hamstring. In this case, you're going to think about pushing backwards, turning on your butt and your hamstring. And again, same thing, you'd want to do that for about 10 seconds. Okay, after you've contracted your muscles, then you're going to feel it looser and you can pick it up to the next barrier. See, I've gained about, I don't know, 10, 15 degrees of hip extension and I haven't let my back arch. So that's standing hip flexion, both a normal stretch as well as a pails and rails stretch. So you can play around with those contract, relax type of stretches. Again, remember, they're a bit more of an aggressive approach. So if you don't feel comfortable or if you're not sure, then maybe hold off those guys and just do the normal stretching. So the next way I really like to have people stretch their hip flexors is kneeling. So let me kneel down. Again, Jeff, you might just, yeah, there you go. So it's the same equation where you do a pelvic thrust first. Now, because my knee is bent here, you'll probably feel more stretch down in your quad, which is fine. That's all part of it. You need to stretch that as well. So you do the pelvic tilt, and same thing, you're gonna just make sure you don't dump into your low back. You come forward, and I'm really feeling that right now down in my quad. I'm not feeling it. I'm a little bit up here, but mostly down in here, which means my quads are super tight. So I get, oh, there goes the barrier. So I went to a nice, comfortable stretch barrier, and now I'm just feeling it starting to release, so I can pick it up a little bit more. Okay, so again, the normal stretch routine would be that you just do this, where you hang out for 20 or 30 seconds, and then you would switch to the other leg, and you just go back and forth 2 or 3 times. The pails and rails side of the equation, in this case, again, pails means we're turning on the muscles that are in the stretch position, so that means I'm going to try and pull my leg go this way. So you just activate the muscles, hold it there for about 10 seconds. And again, it's like a 5 or a 10% contraction. You're not jacking it right up. And then after about 5 or 10 seconds, you relax and you would push your leg back the other way. So you turn on your glute and your hamstring. That's the rail side of the stretch. Okay. And after contracting, you release and you should be able to pick it up to the next barrier of stretch. That'll probably be a pretty good stretch for most of you. Okay. And again, you can repeat that formula on the other leg, and you can go back and forth and do each leg minimum of twice. And again, if you're super keen, you could throw in a third one, or if you got nothing else going all day long. So that's hip flexors, okay? Those 2 stretches, you don't have to do both. You pick one or the other. Personally, I'm more of a fan of a kneeling stretch, but just know that you got to have something under your knee, because there's some really sensitive tissues on the front of your knee. If you're on a hard surface, it'll hurt. The other thing is, some of you, your knees may not like being kneeled on, so that's why I threw in the standing one. Let's go to the other side of the joint now. We'll talk about hamstrings. There's a couple different ways I'm going to show you how to stretch hamstrings, but the caveat on hamstrings is we often hear people feel like they're tight in the back of their legs all the time, and they're trying to stretch it, and they find that their pain is getting worse. Either the tension isn't releasing or the pain's ramping up. And the mistake there is they actually have tension on their sciatic nerve, and it's not their hamstring that is feeling tight in the back of their leg, it's their sciatic nerve. And if you try and stretch a sciatic nerve, it will not like that. So if you're one of the people that always feels like you got to stretch your hammy, and you try and you're either not getting anywhere or you feel like it's making your pain worse, be really careful of these ones. Maybe reach out to one of your healthcare practitioners to see if you've got a little bit of tension on your sciatic nerve, and there'll be workarounds that you can do if that's the case. So there's 2 different ways I can show you how to stretch hammies. One is with a yoga strap. I'll be interested to see what comes back to me in pictures of what people choose instead of yoga straps. So send the pictures along, I love them. At any rate, you can use a towel or a belt or various farming or gardening implements. Oh, you know what? I forgot to show you guys. I got special socks for these classes. Check these out. had them designed, and I will tell you they're anatomically correct. Pretty cool, eh? All right, so let's get after hammies. All you do is you loop the strap around the ball of your foot, and you're going to lay back, okay? Now the trick with this one, again, is you don't want to lose that natural curve in your back. So what you might need is a pillow or something, a very shallow pillow. I've got this little curve, and I'm going to just put it in the small of your back, or my back, okay? And that keeps that curve in there, because as you start to bring your leg up, what you're going to find is your back will start to want to flatten into the ground, and I don't want that. Remember, I want movement at the hip, not in the spine. Okay, so as you keep the curve in your back, basically you're going to, same principle, you're going to bring the leg up to where you feel a nice gentle tension in the back of your leg, and you're just going to hang out there for a little while. Because you've got a hold of the strap, you're able to relax into the strap, into the stretch. You don't want to have to be holding your leg there. So there's that barrier, and I can pick it up. It's just melting. It's coming up a little bit more. Okay. So again, a normal stretching routine would be you just reach the barrier and you can hang out there for 20 or 30 seconds, and then you would switch legs and you would do each leg a couple times. But if we want to add the pails and rails to the equation, the pails side of it would be, okay, so this is the side of the joint, the back of the leg that's getting stretched. So the contraction would be to try and bring your leg back down to the floor. So you would just maintain pressure, hold on to the strap, and you would be pushing your leg back that way, contracting your hammy mostly, maybe a bit of glute. After about 5 or 10 seconds of contraction, without letting your leg move, then the rail side of the equation is the front, the hip flexor. So you just put your hand on your knee and you would just start to bring your leg towards you, okay? And again, you would hold that for 5 or 10 seconds. Okay, and then after you've contracted, you release the tension and you should be able to bring your leg a little bit higher.
Albany.
Oh, somebody's got their mic on. If you don't mind trying to turn off your mic, I'd appreciate that. Okay, and if you do a good enough job, I forgot to mention that friends of mine help manage Cirque du Soleil down in Vegas. So if you're feeling flexible and your hips are moving well enough, I could maybe make a call and get you an audition with the circus. Just message me. Okay, so that's one way to do your hamstrings. Again, you want to do each leg 2 or 3 times, and you hold stretch positions for 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, another way to try and stretch hammies is against a wall. So let's just move over to the wall here. Come on over here, Jeff. So basically, maybe move over to here, Jeff. Yeah, that's good right there. So basically, you're going to want to get your butt up against a wall. Now, the distance of your butt from the wall is going to be dictated by how flexible you are. So if you're not very flexible, you start further away from the wall, and all you're going to do is get your feet up on the wall. So I'm reasonably flexible, so I'm going to start pretty close to the wall, and you're just going to lay on your back with your feet up the wall like this, okay? Again, I forgot my thing over there to put in the small of your back, but you might want a pillow or something under the small of your back, okay? If you're not very flexible, you're gonna be further away from the wall like this, okay? So basically, we're gonna go through 3 different stretches now that we're in this position against the wall. The first is hamstrings. I'll go quickly on hammies because we've already done them with the yoga strap, but essentially, if you think it's the same thing, you can just go into a nice stretch, and then as you feel the tension come off, you just wiggle your butt a little bit closer to the wall. I love wall stretches because you can just breathe and relax into the stretch. You're not fighting to control balance or anything. But the pails and rails stuff gets easier on the wall too, because remember, pails is the back of the leg. So you would just push your heels into the wall a little bit. Little tiny contractions though, like 5–10%. You're not pushing really hard. Rails means you put your hands on your knees and you'll start pulling them this way, okay? So again, isometric, we're not moving. And then after you release the tension, you should feel like there's less stress or less stretch on the back, so you can even move a little bit closer to the wall, and that lets you stretch more, okay? And if you can get up to this is normal range of motion. You really don't have to stretch much more than that, unless, of course, you want to try out for the circus. Let me know. So that's hamstrings. We've already kind of done them with the strap. So let's move on to the next one, and that's what's called, so the third stretch I want to cover. So we've done hip flexors, we've done hammies, and now we're going to do the inside of the thighs called the adductors. And this is the same position. All you do now is you just let gravity pull your legs down, okay? Don't force them. It's the same principle. You're just going to go to where you feel a nice stretch, and then as you're stretching that first barrier, you should feel it start to release within about 10 seconds. Okay, yeah, there it goes. I can feel mine just a little tiny bit. So again, the normal stretching routine is you would hang out in this position for 20 to 30 seconds. After 20 to 30 seconds, you can bring your legs back in and rest for a little bit, and then you can go back to that position again a second time. Now, the pails and rails side of it would be, the pails means you're trying to activate the muscles that are getting stretched. So for that, you just put your hands on the inside of your knees, and you would just gently contract as if you're trying to bring your legs back together. And the rail side of the equation means you're trying to contract the muscles on the outside, so you just take your hands on the outside of your legs and you would push them down. Okay? And after you've activated them, then you would just release it, relax, and you should feel like you can open up your legs a little bit more. So those are great stretches. Adductor stretches will really help improve your hip mobility. They're often overlooked. So again, you would try that for two or three times in a row. The last stretch I want to cover is the external hip rotators. Some of you will have heard of one of the big external rotators is called the piriformis muscle. It's a smaller muscle that's deep inside your butt there, and it's in charge of externally rotating or turning your hip out, and it gets really tight. So a good way to do that, some of you, if you've heard of yoga positions called pigeon stretch, that's good for external hip rotators. A really easy way to do it is what's called a figure four. Oftentimes you'll see people laying on their back and pulling their leg towards them. That's fine. It's just against the wall is a really easy way to do it. And again, you just back up enough so that you're almost 90-90, but if you're not flexible enough, then you would just have to back up more. You just take the leg and you would just put it into this position. You just have to be mindful of knees. This can be a little bit of strain on knees, so if you have some arthritis in your knees, be careful. You just gently hold your knee there, and you should already feel a stretch coming into either the buttock here, or some of you, if you're tight up in what's called your TFL muscle, you might feel it on the outside of your hip too. So again, a normal stretch position would just be to hold it there for about 20 to 30 seconds, and then you would switch legs, okay? Nice and gentle. Now, if you're wanting to introduce the pails and rails approach, you would get into that stretch position, and then you would take your hand for pails and put it on the outside of your knee, and you would push your knee against resistance for about 10 seconds. And then the rails would be to put your hand on top of your knee and pull your knee towards you without letting your knee move. And once you've activated those muscles in both positions, then you can release. And in order to pick up more tension or increase the stretch, all you have to do is just start to push your toes into the wall. So you lift your heel off the wall, and that will bring your hip into a greater stretch position. I love this against the wall because you can just breathe and relax into it. Whereas if you try this in the sitting position or laying on your back, grabbing your hip, it gets harder to try and release tension in the muscles. Okay, so those are 4 really good stretches. that combined with the hip mobility routine, the 4 exercises we went through last week, should make a dramatic difference in your hip mobility, which will then offload your back. And so I would wager that you should be noticing a significant reduction in your back pain within about 2 weeks of doing this. So if you started it last week and you were diligent doing it every day, then I would hope to see some significant improvement in your back pain by the first week of May. So again, if you're struggling with any of that, you can just reach out to me or the rest of our crew here. We're answering the phones and emails. We can clarify things for you. Next week, what I want to try and do, so these 2 weeks have been focusing on improving your hip mobility. So I think now it's time to try and get into some strengthening. And so I'm going to introduce some really good strengthening exercises that you can start to do. So we've got the new ranges of motion in your hip, and now we just got to build up the endurance so things can work all day long and you're nice and strong. So that's what we'll be covering next week. But because of this week's feedback, I had a lot of questions, so I put it out there to a poll for you. Just email me back if you have individualized questions that you want me to try and address. Just stick it in a quick email and I'll read through it and I'll try and speak to that during the class. We're looking at maybe, I want to get these a little more interactive. So if you have individual questions or concerns that you want to clarify, just email me and I'll try and address that in the upcoming sessions. Okay. So I think we're almost out of time. I hope that was valuable. Again, the challenge for the week, I hope everybody tried to get out and do some walking. The weather up here is beautiful. Drinking water, we talked about the 8x8 formula. I don't know if you tried that, but that can make a huge difference. And so the other challenge is now you've got your 4 hip dissociation exercises and you've got your 4 hip stretches. Those are going to go a long way to getting these hips moving and offloading your back. Next week, we're going to get into some actual strengthening for the hips. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope that was helpful, and we'll be in touch.